Hey everyone! If you're a follower of the channel, you know I'm in Porto right now without any real means of recording except my phone and a laptop for this script, hence the crappy quality of this episode. Also, I have a bit of a cold, which isn't helping. I still wanted to cover some news though, so here we go. Starting with Path of Exile 2 this time. There has been a state of early access update in which the developers pat themselves on the back a little bit, and I think that is actually well deserved. I feel the criticism towards this title has been a bit much at times, and while of course there is plenty of work left and criticism is warranted, it should be within reason. Too often it is not, which is why a post like this helps to put things into perspective. The state of early access primarily talks about what changes the game has made over the last 10 weeks and highlights some of the major improvements. Quality of life improvements, such as the teleport across checkpoints in mapping, which solved a lot of issues, the core experience of mapping with buffed drops, more variety in tower maps, and more map bosses which give tons of loot, itemization improvements, mostly on uniques, although I personally feel these are still quite underwhelming, some balance changes making us remember to not play builds that Jungrown posts, because those all got nerfed, and fixing several crashes, while also acknowledging that people still experience crashes, particularly on NVIDIA GPUs. After this retrospective, which once again puts into perspective how much the game has already improved, the devs dive into what they see are the four main open issues. Those are balancing issues, so I think we are getting significant balance reworks in 0.2.0, not enough build options, and they seem to want to solve those using more build defining uniques, more balance, but then in endgame progression. I'm not sure exactly what they mean here, but at least Mark and Jonathan talked about this in their Q&A and said that completing X maps per map tier wasn't necessarily great. I agree, but I didn't think it was a major issue either. Maybe there's more to it that I'm not aware of. And finally, not enough cool things to find in endgame, which is also a fair remark. The most notable things not discussed here, I think, is crafting. That will simply improve by adding more mechanics, also stated by Mark in that Q&A, and mechanics, for example, like Harvest. For now, all the devs mention is they need also new content to draw people back into Path of Exile 2. So, I would expect some new content as well, perhaps a class or something. Either way, there are no timelines yet, but looking at the PoE 1 event, which lasts until the end of March, I would expect 0.2 to launch at the start of April. And with that, let us move to the Path of Exile 1 event, because I do not know why the devs did not think about creating such an event a little earlier. With fairly limited resources and in a short time period, they managed an event like this with very significant changes, all new ascendancies, one even wackier than the other, a new endgame system. This is going to be a great event, I think, and it already starts on the 20th of February. I'm in Porto until the 22nd myself, but when I return, I am definitely taking part in this. But that makes you wonder, right? Like, how can they do something like this so fast? And the way this event was set up reminded me a bit of my own line of work in IT architecture. In IT architecture, you have a few concepts that roughly mean the same thing: loosely coupled or decoupled architecture, composable architecture, and modular architecture. For example, let's say you have an application that does signing, so collect a customer signature. You want this application to stand on its own and have ideally no dependencies on other systems, so you can use this signing application from anywhere, meaning a mobile app, a web frontend, maybe an employee frontend that wants to request a signature, and even backend processes like selling a product, which may also require an online signature. Signing here is decoupled from its consumers. It is a standalone or modular component, and it can be reused in many different processes and customer journeys. Signing interacts with many other standalone applications, but should not be directly dependent on them. making this a composable architecture. When looking at Path of Exile, they have a similar architecture, I think. Most of the components in the game seem to be standalone components, making it fairly easy to mix and match those into a fun event. For example, ascending itself, meaning completing the lab, is decoupled from your actual ascendancy. This makes it possible to swap out ascendancies without having to significantly change the lab, and I think literally zero changes to the lab were made for this event. Within an ascendancy, I think the ascendancy nodes themselves are decoupled from the ascendancy. The ascendancy, let us say Necromancer, is just a framework in which several nodes exist, but the devs can likely swap out simply one node for another within that framework. Again, an architecture consisting of modular building blocks, the nodes. What this allows you to do is to make changes rather quickly, and in this case replace all 19 ascendancies within a few weeks' time, probably still with a skeleton crew. All the nodes, and the nodes within most ascendancies are existing skills or effects in Path of Exile, probably also standalone effects which are normally, for example, applied to a unique or a suffix, like aspect of the spider, but are now made available in an ascendancy node. This should take very little development effort. I think this is a little bit less true for the new endgame system, where instead of an Atlas passive tree, we got a relic box and now you can slot in a bunch of relics. They can reuse quite a bit from the Sanctum, which works in the same way and also applies the effects of relics to a certain zone, but as this concerns now the whole Atlas, I do think a bit more work went into this. Plus, designing all the different relics and basically transforming many of the Atlas passive tree nodes towards relics literally took the most time. Nevertheless, it's impressive, and I think it's going to be a blast. So many broken builds, and I think very little reason for GGG to nerf stuff unless it is clearly a broken interaction or it melts the servers. I think both instances will happen, by the way, but probably not that often. You get a bunch of cosmetic rewards as well every 20 levels or so, but honestly, I think the joy of playing all these wacky ascendancies should be its own reward. From an SSF perspective, I think the relics will be a little bit more time consuming to collect, and I think map progression will be a bit slower too, but you're playing SSF, why bother too much, right? There's no need to be first out of the gates, so I will just be taking my time and enjoying all this new stuff. It is likely I will make some content about it, we will see though. Apologies for the scuffed episode, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. Thanks so much for watching everyone, guys. I appreciate it. Love you all. See you soon. Bye bye.